bring in the dog and cat, maybe crack open a window and let the breeze in too. You can put on a pot of joe, slip into those silky jammies, plop yourself down someplace comfy, turn down the lights and turn up the radio because we're about ready to rumble. In a moment, the aerial phenomenon with Randall Nickerson. Welcome back. Randall Nickerson has been working in the film industry since 1987. He was an actor, transitioned to cinematography, and ultimately is directing, now working on his first feature-length documentary project. It's called The Aerial Phenomenon, being produced under the guise of his company called String Theory Films, and he's here to talk about it for the first time. Randy, good to have you here.
Hey, thank you.
So, 2007, you first hear about this project. Who gives you the call, and what do you think about it when you hear it?
I got a call from a friend of John Max, and I actually had shown her a documentary that I just finished. It was a 16-minute short documentary on the value of silence and listening, and on an individual level, a cultural, community level, and on a world level. And she was struck by the film and the way I was telling the story, and she presented me with John Mack's interviews of these children in Africa, which was just completely fascinating to me when I watched it. Because, like many people that have seen it, it's there's a sense of truth that just is coming across. The problem is what they're talking about is unbelievable. Like a craft would come down and two strange beings would get out of this craft and approach a playground.
Had you ever done any UFO stuff before? Have you read UFO books or worked on a UFO film?
I've never worked on a UFO film, but I've definitely had an interest in keeping an eye on it, the topic, and this definitely made me far more interested to see it, but also to ask more questions. Because even when I got Dr. John Mack's footage, that brought a lot of questions to me and about what this was about. What did they experience? More information on their culture that these people had encountered.
So 2007, Zimbabwe is not exactly a tranquil garden spot.
No, I was warned by the State Department before I went over in 2008 in the beginning that it wasn't supposed to be in the country, for one, but I had spent several months trying to find out if it still existed. And I was told it had burnt down, that they closed it, and
Hey, Randy, we're having some audio difficulties there. I don't know if it's your phone or what
me?
I think it's on your end, so maybe hold the phone up close to your mouth so we can hear you. But anyway, back to the point about did somebody have to talk you into going to Zimbabwe, and did they fill you in on what the scene was on the ground there?
No, actually, that was my fault. As soon as I found out where the school was and the fact that it was running, and then I had heard that there were 3 teachers still there from the incident time, I just got on as quickly as I could. I got prepared and got on a plane. So I was aware of the difficulties going on there, but it didn't seem to matter too much at the time. Thinking back on it now, I probably would have waited, but it was worth doing it. I felt like the story was happening, and I didn't want to lose any more witnesses that I could talk to.
So you had seen some of Dr. Mack's work and read some of his material, and
yes.
The idea was you're going to jump into this and do a short documentary, or did you know what the project would become?
No, it was supposed to be a small in-house documentary, pretty much with just John Mack's material. And, the more I looked at it and the more I found out about it, the more I was like, this is a really important story. There's so many characters involved that, credible people like the BBC reporter who first, he was the first on the scene. And Dr. John Mack being involved, and the story itself is I just found it so fascinating, and I just didn't feel like it I felt like it deserved to be a feature documentary because there's so many elements to this story, and not like I wanted to do something different as far as not being a traditional UFO special effects, woo-woo stuff kind of thing. I wanted to do something that talked about the people, that what about these people that have had these experiences and have to live their lives after them, and what are these experiences? Many questions, but to really concentrate on the people rather than the perpetrators or aliens or really wanted to cover that because we can all relate to that no matter what the event happens to be. The aftermath of that event is we all have that sort of those reactions in common. Like a car, I think of a simple thing, not very simple, but a car accident or something like that. We all walk away from it, and we have very similar.
You live with the consequences,
later.
right? Well, take us back to
Take
us back to 1994 and sketch sort of the broad outlines of what happened on that day.
Yes, 1994 was September 16th. It was the morning break at 10:30 in the morning. They were on recess, the children, from grades 1 to 7. The seventh graders were in charge of the playground scene. They're called prefects, and the teachers at the time were in a staff meeting, actually discussing wages. And at that time, there were lights in the sky that several witnesses saw, and then a flash and some sound that got everybody's attention. And they saw the silver thing amongst the trees about 200 yards out from the schoolyard. And they saw at least two. The primary report from all was that there were two of them. There was one that stayed near the silver object, and the other one that approached the playground. So there was a lot of chaos and fear after this moment that seemed, according to all witnesses that I've either gotten through archival or through other interviews, it took place for about 15 minutes. But after that, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of excitement and fear mixed together. And they went to tell the teachers as a group of 100 kids running inside, screaming into this staff meeting. And and they were met with disbelief, by the teachers at the time. And what happened was, it wasn't the school itself that told the story or broke the story. It was actually the kids going home to their parents and telling their parents what had happened. The school was kind of playing it down, didn't want to, make a big deal. And then one of the parents called the BBC, and the BBC was there a couple days later. So a lot happened in a very short period of time, and there's so many details that I'm probably missing. But
we'll get into them. We got time. Did any of the kids stay outside and see what became of the craft or the occupants?
From all the reports, they said that it just disappeared, that it just vanished.
Describe the
one
the
witness
occupants.
that said it just picked up from the ground and disappeared. Not that there's actually nobody that said that it was really actually sitting on the ground.
Just kind of hovering.
Yep, that's been most of the reports has been that, and no one's ever told me that it was actually on the ground.
Jumping ahead, so
Sure.
I've seen the clips of Dr. Mack talking to the kids and the witnesses, and they make drawings. Describe the beings that are outlined in these drawings and as told by the witnesses.
Yep. Sorry, George, I think I lost
Yeah.
you there for a second.
I was asking you to describe the beings as described by the witnesses and as outlined in the drawings that Dr. Mack got to see.
Yes. They were, according to the students back at the time, from the archival footage, which is something amazing in itself, to have an incident happen and have so many different media organizations cover it right after the event is pretty unusual. I have 6 sources of archival video from that time. And the drawings, the being as they were drawing it and describing it was, I get a kick out of this because the kids was like, wow, was like a person in, a grade 6 size, something they could relate to. It was like somebody in 6th grade, so it meant they were not very tall. And that was pretty much the description all around, was they were, around 4 feet tall, and they were dressed in a black, almost like a diver's suit. Has been the explanation, or the description. Very shiny, seamless, like there was no, buttons or zippers or anything on it. That they had large heads and big black eyes, and the other features on the face were not were not prominent. There's a few that recognized that it said that it had a little nose. Nobody really said anything about there being a mouth or anything like that on this thing. So that's pretty much the description. Yeah.
I had said in the introduction that there were 64 witnesses. It sounds like there were more than that, but I think it's probably 64 who were interviewed. We're going to get into some of the descriptions and the effect it had on these kids, not only then, but later in life. And then you can tell the story about how Dr. John Mack became involved. We're talking with Randall Nickerson about the Ariel phenomenon, this film project that's underway, and we'll be right back with more Coast to Coast AM. We're talking about something else entirely that occurred in Africa, in Zimbabwe, September 16th, 1994, 23 years ago yesterday. Randall Nickerson is a filmmaker here to tell us about the Ariel phenomenon. We'll pick up the story right after this on Coast to Coast AM. Back with Randy Nickerson to talk about the Ariel phenomenon. Randy, as you mentioned in the previous segment, within days, this story sort of percolates out. The BBC hears about it, so they send a guy go into the rural area of Zimbabwe and check it out. Who's the guy?
His name was Tim. Tim Leach. He was a war reporter from the BBC. He worked with ITN before that. He basically covered genocide and atrocities in Africa all throughout the continent, and he had been shot. I mean, his story is incredible in itself, and he was the person called to check out this incident, and it really affected him profoundly. I mean, when I interviewed him a few years ago, he had kept everything from that time.
I was going to ask. Yeah, I was going to ask, did he keep all the raw footage of that? Is it film? Did he shoot it on film or video?
He shot it on Beta SP.
Right.
So that, the typical camera crew at the time was shooting Beta SP. But yeah, he kept everything, his notes, you name it. And I was just, like a lot of these people that I've run into that worked on this story or covered this story, they had kept everything. After over 15, 20 years later, they still had it in a safe place because they knew it was important. Even some of the teachers that were at the school at the time did the same thing.
So this guy has covered war and atrocities, things of that sort. This is a different assignment for him. How did he approach it? What did he think as he's heading in, and how did it affect him? As you mentioned, it seemed to have a profound impact on him.
Yeah, I think the way he approached it, I love the way he approached it. He approached it like, well, you must have seen an airplane, or you've seen something easily understandable, and that they had mistaken what they said they saw as something else. So his line of questioning was very skeptical, and I think he kept getting answers that he wasn't happy with, and it started to affect him, and he couldn't, just started. He was afraid, and he actually said to me several times that I've never been so afraid in my life when I started to realize that there was actually something to this story. And that's when he reached out to Dr. John Mack for his help, because he felt like he was over his head. And he was also dealing with Cynthia Hind, who wrote a book about this story and did a lot of the investigation as well. So I wanted to mention her as well. She was an important part of this. But then John Mack flew over and interviewed the children, and within a few months after the incident time.
There's some great footage of Dr. Mack interviewing the kids and getting them to make drawings, things of that sort. I mean, he has a real a good way with the witnesses, not only young ones, but all ages.
Yeah, that's true.
So who shot his stuff? When Dr. Mack comes over, who is shooting that footage?
He came over. He hired a crew to over there to cover it. And they also, that same crew was from South African Broadcasting Company, also had filmed earlier. They had gone to the site right after the BBC was there and interviewed all the kids as well. So, one of the things that's really fascinating to me about this whole thing is the consistency over time with the interviews, on a factual or, a study level. It's just interesting that if it was made up or was something else or something like that, the story would change, and it did not change, even after all this time.
As you mentioned, Tim Leach, the BBC guy, he has expectations. I'm going to figure out an explanation for this. He starts interviewing the kids. Their stories, the clips that I have seen in chunkier film, their stories are remarkably similar. I mean, they're not all over the place. They're the same story, witness after witness, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think Cynthia Hind said it best. Was if they were all exact stories, there's more chance that there would have been some kind of corroboration around it. But when she was investigating this, she said the fact that they were telling their stories individually from their own perspective, where they were on the playground, or told, it's just like a car accident or something else. Everybody has a different experience of it, but they see the same thing. So that was and I saw that too. I'm like, well, okay, then the stories are amazingly similar, and no reason for that to be that way.
How old are these kids? Because, I mean, I've seen, the other clips where there's some speculation, they must have made it up, or they're only kids. How old are they? They're from 6 to, 12?
Yeah, 6 to 12. Yeah, 13. So probably the oldest. And, one of the things that around the witnesses that not many people know about, and I kind of discovered it on the way, was the grade 1s and 2s were never interviewed. The younger kids, they wanted to protect them, understandably. So they never talked about it to them. They never brought anything to them or had them do drawings or anything like that. So I started running across these now adult children that were in grade 1 and 2 that did see it and that did have an experience about it, and had nowhere. And that's another big thing about this is, people don't have a place to go to talk about this stuff and how it eats at a person. We have this sort of cultural, at least in this country, it's probably the worst in this country, where there's some kind of taboo about talking about this stuff. And you see the effects when you're doing a project like this. You see how it affects people, and you see their uneasiness with coming forward. And I'm sure you've seen it a million times in doing your show, and
once or twice.
It's hard to get people to come forward, and it needs to change. Like we could be missing something here, like how we are making. We were always making some new discovery in science that proves that our thoughts about it yesterday were not correct, and maybe we're not correct about this phenomena. That they're on a large scale, like that there's something here that maybe we should look at, because life in the universe, where science is really bringing that to our door every single day. That there's planets that could support life out there that have all the right conditions, and so what I don't understand, I guess, in meeting all these people, like, well, why aren't we talking about this? Because this may be what an intelligent life form. This may be how it manifests, and that it may not be in some kind of concrete way that we understand, or technology that we understand. But I just hope in the future, that we can just open our minds a little bit to just say, well, maybe there's something to these stories.
I want to get into in a couple of minutes the testimony that you got from the witnesses as young adults. But back to this guy, Tim Leach from the BBC. You said it profoundly affected him. How? What did he tell you in the more recent interview you did with him?
Yeah, he never had stopped thinking about it. He wrote songs about it. It just, like he would said himself, it blew his mind. And this guy has had his mind blown by seeing some pretty, having some very difficult, post-traumatic stress situations with war and having his crew shot. I mean, it's just an incredible story in himself. But yeah, I mean, it just, as he said in his own words, it opened my mind to a whole new dimension of possible reality, it profoundly affected him, and a lot of the witnesses too. I don't know if too many people are aware of this, but there were other witnesses on that morning, adults. There was a pilot in the air the night before. They all had, there's several that I found, and that's, I guess, when you come on an investigation that's been completed a long time ago, you can always find something, and I was surprised too, but you're going to find something that nobody else found, and that has happened. So, I mean, and all those people, and the kids particularly, and have, it just leaves you with a lot of questions, and so one of the witnesses it just made me realize that anything is possible, that we don't have it all figured out.
Can you share with us the general idea of how this story spread after Tim does his piece for the BBC? Is it a media frenzy? I know some of the clips that I saw in your film is typical media reaction, kind of snickering about the whole thing.
Yeah, at aerial school when it happened there.
Yes.
Mean?
Yeah. So Tim is there. BBC does a story. Who else comes in? Is there an influx of a lot of other media? Is the story told all over the world? Yeah,
that's true. It wasn't told all over the world until, there were several media organizations, 4 of them anyway, that were immediately right after it happened, which is incredible to have that footage. And then once John Mack got there, that's when he got back, Sightings did a story on it, and it pretty much disappeared. The story disappeared pretty much 1997. There wasn't anything really talked about in a major media way at all. But yeah, there was a frenzy. There was a frenzy initially for sure, and then John Mack, his own story is a big part of this story because of his own journey with being convinced that this is one of the stories that the aerial school really had a big impression on him, and he had been, witness or interviewing other witnesses at the time because he was studying this as he was interested because he had met several people that he could not diagnose with some other mental illness or anything else that were telling these stories. And so I think the aerial school story really affected John Mack and him going even further publicly. So that's another very...
Just for the benefit of our audience, Dr. Mack was a Pulitzer Prize winner as a writer. He was a psychiatrist, Harvard Medical School, a brilliant man who became interested in what we call the abduction phenomena and started investigating it. I had the the honor of meeting him and interviewing a couple of times in the early 90s. He died in 1994, tragically, but I guess a lot of the work that he did is included in your film here because he made statements about it. He went through his own trials and tribulations at Harvard Medical School. The cynics and critics tried to get him kicked out. And
that's true.
He defended this kind of research.
That's true. He was a rather brilliant man. And who was just, taking this story or these stories that he was hearing from credible people, and he came to a place where he, in his own words, that he could not explain this with a clinical diagnosis, and he was highly, highly, highly educated and worldly man, and I think he, like many people who see this, meet people that have had these experiences and hear these stories, like for real, they take it seriously. People don't just come out of the woodwork and tell these stories, and or in the case of Ariel's school, you don't have this many kids, and I really don't know the number. It's far more than was originally stated back in the time, but I don't know how you can get those amount of kids, and that exactly was what Tim Leach said, and the BBC reporter and other reporters who covered it is like, well, I don't know how you can get anybody to keep a story that consistent, or somebody to come out and say, oh, we all made it up, or it's just an incredible story.
Skeptics had a field day with John Mack. They said there's one that's quoted in your film. John has lost it. It's incoherent. There's no evidence for it. Yet the testimony of the kids, the drawings, the statements that are made by other witnesses. I did not see the part about the pilot in your film, but maybe you could describe some of the adult witnesses who corroborate what the kids had said.
Yeah, the night before, there were actually 3 pilots in the air at the time. The pilot I spoke with and his co-pilot and another pilot that were in formation, actually, in Zimbabwe at the time, or passing by the border of Zimbabwe, and they were at 25,000 feet. They saw an object off the left-hand side of their wing, and it looked, from their description, it looked like just a ball of light. And all 3 of them saw it. They all saw it cross in front of their track, which is right in front of them, and cross the horizon in 4 seconds. And that's pretty fast for anything to be within the Earth's atmosphere, and to being at 25,000 feet is you have a big view of that horizon, and that's a long distance to travel. But anyway, these people were, again, that was a long time ago, but they got in contact with me when they heard that I was making a film on this story. And they said, well, and they had it in their logbooks and everything. And thank God they came forward. It's just another of many who have come forward. The woman in the morning, she was there early in the morning, and she saw this thing that was glowing orange outside of the back of her house. And she was interviewed by the BBC at the time. And it had a flat bottom and a round top, and or a oval type top with a flat bottom, and it definitely left an impression on her. And that was the morning of the 16th. So yeah, there are a lot of other witnesses, and I'm really glad that when you're making a film, people on this subject, I've found. And I'm so glad I'm almost getting to the end of it, because it's been a long journey. But it's one of those stories. It's worth the extra time, no matter how much time it takes. And but you meet a lot of people come forward to you and talk about their own personal stories on airplanes or wherever you are. They hear you making a film on this. They pull you to the side and say, "Hey, I had this thing happen. I haven't told anybody about it, and I don't want you to tell anybody about it. But I wanted somebody to hear me out." And
I know what you mean.
I've
been doing UFO stories for a lot of years, and it doesn't matter what other stories I cover. mob stuff or government corruption. When I'm in the grocery store or a restaurant or somewhere, that's what people want to tell me. They don't want any publicity.
Yeah.
They will ask the question, hey, do you really believe that stuff? They don't really care whether I believe it or not. They're there to tell me their story. And I'm sure the same is now true for you.
Yeah, that's so true.
There's a
you
quote.
don't know, you don't realize it until you have it happen.
Right.
And then you realize, wow, there's a lot of people not talking about this, that know a lot.
There's a quote in the film from Dr. John Mack in which he says, look, it's not my fault that people are describing something that does not exactly fit into our understanding of reality, something to that nature. I've heard him speak about that a number of times, and that really is the central theme of his message, and that his work is that this phenomena is trying to tell us something about the nature of reality itself.
Yeah, I believe that's true. I mean, I've follow science a lot, and the discoveries in quantum theory and quantum mechanics, and what we're finding in planets out there. I mean, we have. I think personally, I feel like we're going to be forced to open our minds because
I'll tell you what, Randy Nickerson, we're going to have to take a break here. We'll talk a little bit more about that, and then I want to hear what you heard from the witnesses after you interviewed them as adults. We'll be right back.